You put off the email again this morning. You told yourself you'd do it after coffee, then after lunch, then tomorrow. Here's the strange part. 600 years ago, in cramped rooms lit by candlelight, tax collectors were writing down the exact same behavior in the exact same pattern from people who had never heard of emails, deadlines, or inboxes. And what they wrote down explained something about you that self-help books have been getting wrong for decades. Medieval tax rolls were never meant to be psychology records. They were dry lists of who owed what, and when they paid it. But when researchers who study historical records started digging through centuries of these ledgers, they noticed something odd. Payments didn't trickle in steadily. They clustered. Huge spikes right before a deadline, long stretches of almost nothing before that, no matter how much time people have been given. Sound familiar? It should, because that pattern isn't a modern invention. It isn't a symptom of smartphones or short attention spans. It's older than the printing press. Here's the mechanism underneath it. Your brain doesn't actually treat future deadlines as real threats. Researchers who study decision-making have found that when a consequence is far away in time, the brain processes it more like an abstract idea than an actual event. A deadline 3 weeks out barely registers as urgent because emotionally, distant time doesn't feel dangerous. Only close time does. This is called temporal discounting. In plain terms, it means the future gets quietly devalued the farther away it sits. A task due in a month feels smaller and less real than the exact same task due tomorrow, even though nothing about the task itself has changed. Now, think about a medieval peasant staring at a tax deadline set months in advance. On paper, plenty of time, but emotionally, that deadline barely existed until it was suddenly close enough to touch. The result wasn't laziness. It was a brain accurately following its oldest rule. Don't react to threats until they're near. That's the first piece. Here's the second. A study analyzing centuries of merchant and guild records found something else buried in the data. People weren't just late because of poor planning. They were late in a specific, predictable rhythm, one that mirrored how the human body handles physical threats. Sudden bursts of intense effort, followed by long periods of almost total stillness. This is the same rhythm your ancestors needed to survive a predator encounter. Long stretches of conserving energy, punctuated by short, explosive bursts when danger was immediate. Your nervous system was never built for sustained, sober effort spread evenly across weeks. It was built for stillness followed by a sprint. You feel this every time you finally sit down and knock out 3 hours of work the night before something is due. That isn't a character flaw kicking in at the last second. That's an ancient survival circuit finally recognizing the deadline as close enough to count as real. Here's where it gets stranger. Historians who study medieval labor patterns found that the wealthiest, most organized households weren't the ones who avoided this rhythm entirely. They were the ones who built external systems to force early urgency. Things like partial payments due at intervals, or local officials who visited in person as reminders. In other words, even 6 centuries ago, people understood that willpower alone couldn't override this wiring. So they engineered artificial scarcity, artificial closeness, to trick the brain into treating a distant deadline like a near one. You do this too, whether you realize it or not. Setting a fake earlier deadline. Telling a friend you'll finish something by Friday, so you feel accountable. Blocking off a calendar slot that makes a task suddenly feel close instead of abstract. None of that is a modern productivity hack. It's the same trick medieval households were using with candle wax and visiting tax officials. Let's go a layer deeper. There's a reason this system hasn't been edited out of you by thousands of years of evolution. A brain that reacted to every distant possible threat with full intensity would burn out constantly, treating every rustle in the grass, every far-off storm cloud, every future obligation as equally urgent. That's not efficient. That's exhausting. And in a world of actual predators, exhausting could get you killed. So the brain developed a filter. Threats and demands are ranked not by how important they are, but by how close they feel. It's a brutally efficient system for surviving physical danger. It's a fairly terrible system for filling out paperwork due in 3 weeks. You're not weak-willed. You are running software optimized for a world where the biggest dangers were close, physical, and immediate, applied to a world now full of distant, abstract, paper-based deadlines it was never designed to handle. This is why guilt doesn't fix procrastination. Guilt is an emotional response, and emotional responses to distant, abstract deadlines are exactly what this system was built to ignore. You can feel terrible about an unfinished task for 3 weeks straight, and your brain still won't treat it as urgent, because urgency was never about how you feel. It was always about how close the danger is standing, which means the real fix was never about trying harder. It was about doing what medieval households already figured out. Make the future closer. Make it physical. Make it visible. A note on the door. A visit from an official. A calendar block that turns an abstract Tuesday 3 weeks away into something concrete, staring back at you today. Think about the last time you crushed a task at the very last minute, heart pounding, fully focused, faster and sharper than you'd been in days. That wasn't panic taking over. That was your oldest circuitry finally agreeing that the threat was real. And maybe that's the real answer to why you put off that email this morning. It has nothing to do with discipline or character or how much you care. It has everything to do with a brain that spent hundreds of thousands of years learning to survive by ignoring anything that wasn't standing close enough to see. 6 centuries ago, someone in a candlelit room stared at a tax deadline they had months to meet and did nothing about it until the collector was standing at their door. You're not so different. You're just waiting for your own version of that knock.